Hi everyone, welcome. Now, I'm not going to do my little piece to camera intro today because I'm going to be working on a self-portrait, and that's probably enough of my face to be staring at for one day. And just secretly, I've had a few tech issues, and this is the fourth time now that I'm attempting to record this, so fingers crossed it works. So yes, you don't need to know that though, peek behind the curtains. But yes, please, if you would like to watch the video and follow along, it's a good idea if you open up some of your own photo editing software and give it a go, because I think it's really great to learn by doing. Some people learn by listening, some people learn visually, but I really learn by actually doing the thing that I'm trying to learn. So if you're trying to learn photo editing, my suggestion is just to open up the software and start fiddling around with things, and you'll get the skills into your muscle memory. That's when it starts getting quicker, easier, and more satisfying. So here we go. So this is a self-portrait of me that I took this morning. You'll see it's like a 0.4 second exposure. I was trying to work in really low lighting conditions to see if that did anything interesting. Usually I do some off-camera flash or off-camera lighting, but this is just natural light with the blinds closed and a very low exposure. So it's not perfectly sharp because it's not perfectly sharp because the long exposure. Sure, I was using a tripod and a remote trigger to fire off the shutter, but I would also have to stay perfectly still for 0.4 of a second, which is not my strong suit. So it's not the sharpest photo ever, but that's what I like to do in these tutorials, is to show you that, things don't have to be perfect as long as you're giving it a go. So let's begin. I'm going to start by cropping it because I think, you can see I took a photo and my backpack's there in the background for starters, but actually, we're trying to be moody and arty, so something a bit more close-up is going to work a bit better. I'm going to work with the rule of thirds here because there's this grid that automatically comes up when I crop in Lightroom, and it's telling you where the thirds are. So you've got 3 vertical thirds, 3 horizontal thirds. And rule of thirds is just like a composition theory that a lot of people use, and it's very, very common. Works pretty well. Usually you'd put a focal point, so say I want people to really focus on my eye. I put that right where those 2 lines intersect. Let's see how that looks actually. It's quite good. I mean, you really are focusing on that eyeball. You're sort of thinking, ooh, what's he looking at, But for my money, it's probably a bit too much. My shoulders and not enough my head, so I might widen it all out a bit. And I'll just put my face in this very center third, but up against the line of the other third, and just play around with that. There's no hard and fast rule really, but good thing to note, my shoulders are sort of in that lower third. I don't know. It's open to interpretation, and this is how I'm interpreting the rule of thirds today. Yeah, that looks all right. Oop. Now, let's start on playing around with these things over here. So, favorite thing to do of mine is first have a look at the histogram. There's a lot of space up here in the highlights where none of this information is reaching. So, let's have a go. I like to hold down Option and then move, because it tells me if I go too far into the whites. See, when that happens, it's telling me I'm losing detail in the highlights, and you can see what happens if I go too far that way. So I'm actually not even going to go right to the end of my histogram there. I'm going to go most of the way. Already I think that's looking better. I like to toggle on the before and after just to make sure I'm doing no harm. Let's do the same with the blacks. I'm holding down Option on my Mac, and it tells me when I'm adjusting the blacks but starting to lose information via those dark patches that are appearing as I move the slider. So let's try not to lose any information. And yes, okay. Let's do a comparison again. Seems to be okay. Not doing any harm. It's looking a bit better. Do we want a bit more contrast? We're trying to look a bit moody. Contrast's moody, right? Let's go for it. Could probably go a bit higher in my highlights actually. I'm starting to go a bit orange. Now, texture. Again, I mean, you see a lot of, on Instagram, I see a lot of people who wind down the texture via, those Facetune apps, and it's, nice way to get rid of pores really quickly. You can see if I wind it right up, you can see I was working outside last week quite a lot and had sunscreen on and my forehead's gone a bit spotty. So by winding that down, everything goes a bit more milky and it looks like you have perfect skin. But for my money in photography, you actually like skin texture. Like, skin texture's a bonus. So sure, you don't want to make it look like, I've broken out with some disease. But you do want to add a little bit of the texture, I reckon. So I just wind stuff up until it gets a bit too noticeable, and then either split the difference or just wind it back a notch. Again with this one, it's going a bit more contrasty when I do that, which is quite nice. I'm always looking, is it giving the photo more depth? Because the more 3D it looks, the more exciting I think it is on the screen. So again, it goes really milky if I go that way. It goes a bit too, crunchy if I go too far that way, but I do want a little bit of that crunchiness just to define the the contrasts, which gives us what appears to be a sharper image. Do you see what I mean? So even though it's technically not sharper, because that's to do with the optics of when I took the photo, it just appears sharper. Okay, I'm going to skip this for now. I'll come back to the tone curve at the end probably. Let's have a look down here at the HSL color. So HSL, hue, saturation and luminance. This is a great place to quickly fiddle with some skin tones. So at the moment, for my money, I'm looking a bit red maybe. So let's play with this top red one, and again just slide it to either end. I look quite too yellow there, I look too red there, but I prefer looking too yellow than I do too red. So I go back to the center and just take it slowly towards the yellow side until it starts to look too affected. Yeah, and then I just wind it back a little bit. Same with this slider here. Do I prefer looking magenta or green? I like the Frankenstein look at that end maybe, so better than I do the magenta one here. So let's just wind it a little bit, and you're just trying to make the skin look natural here and give it some depth. I think this third slider down isn't doing much. Quite often I find when you're doing this sort of thing really quickly for a deadline, these three sliders here at the top of the hue section will do wonders for your skin tones. And it doesn't have to be just for someone pasty white like me. Any skin tone will probably be helped with a little bit of tweaking of these top three red, orange, yellow sliders in the HSL. Okay, so how are we looking? Let's just do another comparison. Again, I think I've got more depth. I think my skin's looking more natural. Let's not mention the bags under the eyes. I always like to just enable the profile corrections. This just means that the software's recognizing which lens I used and that lens has some problems, be they major or minor, hopefully minor. And the software sort of corrects what it thinks those problems are. I tend to agree with it, so I'm just going to click that. And then don't worry about that. I mean, you might not even notice the difference. It's just a bit of like what's called vignetting going on down here in the corner, I guess. Distortion. Although we have cropped it, so you'd see it more if you could still see all four corners of the original image. But just good habit to get into, clicking that enable profile corrections. Transform, don't worry about that. Effects, I might put a bit of post-crop vignetting on later, but let's firstly do my favorite bit, which is the color grading. And this bit sort of, I've sort of got the photo to, now I'm happy with it technically. This color grading is where I'm sort of adding a bit of a filmic look to it. So I'm going to take the colors slightly beyond what's realistic, just to give it a bit more depth. We want to keep it looking realistic, but we also want to, if you push the colors a little bit beyond what's real, then it does give it a filmic look and some more depth, and you can put artistic interpretation into it. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's why I love color grading. So what I tend to do is turn the effect right up. See, that adjusts the intensity of the color. And then I'm starting with my shadows here. And, you see as I swing around, all the shadows are changing color. Try and find one that doesn't feel too out of place naturally with the effect turned right up. See what I mean? Like, you sort of go there and it still looks fairly natural, like way too green obviously, but still it doesn't look too out of place. And whereas maybe you go to that one and it looks too far beyond what could be natural, so, and if you swing through here, all that looks fairly natural, but I kind of like this side over here, like cooler shadows, because it looks a bit matrixy if you go a bit green, doesn't it? So, now that I've picked the color I like, just going to, yeah, that's good, I think. Just going to wind it back, like almost back to the center, so that it's sort of subtle and subliminal depth and not, obvious depth. I mean, if you like that effect, go for it. There's nothing stopping you. But I'm going for a more subtle look today, and again, just check to see if it's doing something nice. I don't know if you agree. I think just giving it that little green tinge just makes my whole head feel a bit more round. And then with the highlights, there's this section over here which I thought looked quite natural, and actually this is sort of the flesh tones, and again, not just for pasty white people, the flesh tones in this software all fits into sort of the same line on the color wheel over here somewhere. So just try and find what suits this particular subject, which in this case is me, and I usually just wind it right back, same as I did with the shadows. Again, check to make sure you're doing no harm. Yeah, I think it's got more depth, and I like to segment the pie reasonably evenly, so I usually start shadows, then go to highlights, then move on to midtones, and because I've got my shadows on that side, my highlights there, let's go for the midtones somewhere down here, and it's going to be very subtle because everything I do is way over the top no matter where I am on the color wheel for my eyes here. So I'm just going to pick something sort of away from the other two quadrants of my color wheel's pie. Don't know if that makes any sense. Maybe even something reddish. Don't know, it's hard. I mean, that's not too bad. It's not going to be the most flattering thing ever, but I'm only going to wind in like the tiniest smidgen of it. Maybe I'll put a bit more green in the shadows. If anything, if you can be extreme anywhere, I reckon it's in the shadows. Anyway, again, just toggling on the color grading on and off to make sure that it looks better and not worse. Again, this is pretty subjective. Depends what you're trying to do. Maybe I do want some more flesh tone. You can do it via, via what I'm moving here, or there's this blending and balance. Actually the blending, it sort of does go a bit more fleshy if I go towards the right side. Let's try the balance as well. Again, it goes a bit warmer. If I go up towards the right, and they're sort of just affecting what these color wheels are counting as shadows, highlights, and midtones. So it's blending the difference between, the shadows and the highlights. Hope that makes sense. Let's see how it's looking. I mean, do you see what I mean about that like more filmic round look now that I've added all the sort of depth of colors? Hopefully you do. I think it's a nice effect anyway. I mean, there are things I could do. What you can do in Lightroom is right click and go edit in, and then edit in Adobe Photoshop, and you can go into real detail there, and I could do things like take all the spots off my face, or this flyaway bit of hair. I could get rid of it. I could get rid of the bags under my eyes. I could make my eyes a bit more shiny. But what I'm trying to show in this photo is the feeling I get very early on a Sunday morning where I wake up and realize I have to make some YouTube tutorials. I don't have to. I do this all by choice. So I promised you earlier I was going to add some post-crop vignetting, and again, just to show you what it's actually doing. It adds some corners, and I think it just draws your eye in a little bit. I mean, you want to make it subtle. I think, there's some Instagram filters that, off the peg, not these bespoke ones like I'm doing in Lightroom, that wind this in quite a fair way, and I'm sort of a bit bored of seeing it. So I'm just going to wind it in a little, just to draw your eye to my face a bit more. Now, in general, I'm quite happy. I think it now looks a bit oversaturated. Like, do you see? I don't know. It's just my feeling. I'll show you what I mean. Like, if I wind it down, just the color. Like, if I go that way, for instance, the color in my skin goes super reddy orange. Because we're going a bit moody, we could even go black and white. But because we've spent all this time working on the color, let's just wind the saturation down just a smidgy. Let's try to see if the vibrance does something nice as well. Again, always looking for the 3D effect in a 2D image with everything I do, particularly in Lightroom. Okay, I'm pretty much done. I'm pretty happy with it. Let's just see what the original was. Fairly flat, fairly grey. Looks like it was taken by an amateur, which it basically was. And then to that one, it's got some nice depth. It's got mood. It's a bit more intense, I think. Now, one little technical thing I like to do is just check my histogram again. And these little triangles, if they're lit up like this one, it's telling me that I'm losing information down the shadow end of my histogram. And if it's off like this one, it's saying I've got a bit of space between the top of the histogram, what's displaying, and the information. So I'm just going to adjust this a little bit just to take my shadows to the clear so they're not squished up against the shadow end of the histogram. It's just force of habit. I like doing it. Makes me feel happy if the histogram's not telling me that anything's bad. I think that's probably, there's probably a technical reason, but I just like, that feeling of that I'm doing things correctly. So, I'm pretty happy with that. You can get a bunch of different effects. I could go back and play with this and make myself look, a bit more tanned, a bit more natural, a bit more moody. I don't know. Whatever you like, really. Have a play with the color grading. It's probably my favorite part, as I probably keep saying. And I hope you've learnt something. And if you haven't, and you haven't been playing along, now's the time to open up your own photo and your own photo editing software and have a play around with everything, because it can be really fun, satisfying. I lose hours doing it. So, yeah. Have a good week. Thanks, everyone.